Hello and welcome to the wonderful world of innova with today's guest, Paul Elwood. Would you state your name for the record?
Paul Elwood.
And is that a vinyl record, a digital record? What's your favorite kind of record?
Well, my favorite right now would probably be CDs because I actually like having a physical product that I can hold. It's strange, but I still have dreams where I'm wandering through record shops, either looking through vinyl bins or CD bins, because I think so much of my psyche is embedded in the notion of finding and listening to great music. And so I love the fact that I can hold a product in my hand, and this is why I'm still kind of committed to the idea of creating CDs.
It seems that future generations will not recognize the sound of CDs clacking against each other in the record bins, but they may recognize the sound of vinyl albums, which have a kind of softer, crinklier rattle as you flip through them. Is that right?
Right, that's true, they do, yeah. And they also have that kind of crinkly rattle when you listen to them. You know, it's strange, one of the cliches of electronic music is putting record noise in with your product, and I still fall back on that cliche. I know it's a cliche and I know it's overused, but I like it still. I like actually having that noise in the background, even though I'm probably more committed to the medium of CD than I am to vinyl. And I know that there's a whole generation out there now creating vinyl, and I think they're very attractive products. But for me, I move periodically, and I don't want to move the vinyl anymore. So CDs are more practical.
You strike me as a man with a banjo. Do you know any good banjo jokes?
Well, the one I like the most is you can always park in a handicap zone if you put your picks on the dashboard.
Good. We've got.
Actually, you know, we probably shouldn't use that one. That's pretty horrible.
Don't worry, nobody's watching this anyway.
I know that.
Answers please in the comments section below. Okay, viewers love to know what kind of pets composers have. Do you have a lifestyle that allows you to have a pet?
No, I travel too much, and oftentimes I'm traveling because of the performing. In fact, part of my life is now in Europe, and I keep one banjo over there because I have a lot of gigs to play there, and I'm just tired of dealing with the airlines when it comes to hauling my banjo around. There's one famous banjo player who talks about the fact that he flies business class so that he has no problem checking his banjo. I don't have that luxury, so and every now and then you'll find some officious airline official that will make you actually check the instrument, so I don't go there.
This sounds like a Monty Python sketch, not Arthur Two Sheds Jackson, but Paul Two Banjos, one in each continent, Elwood.
That's kind of accurate, and I've often fantasized about having several banjos in different locations all over the place, so I can just show up, go to a house, grab the instrument, and go.
And after a tough day picking away at the banjo, how do you spoil yourself? Any guilty pleasures we should know about?
I'm afraid it's Scotch and James Joyce. James Joyce.
Not Jameson's, but James Joyce.
No, not Jameson's. I'm afraid it's Scotch. I don't go for the Irish whiskey so much, but I do go for the Irish literature.
Wow, that seems like a culture clash between the Scots and the Gaels and the Celts and all of that.
It could be, except that I also love Irish music. I play it horribly, but I love Irish music.
Well, maybe if you aligned the Irish whiskey with the Irish music, you'd get better at it.
Maybe something would happen, yeah.
Now, if you weren't making music as a career, assuming this is a career for you, what might you have ended up doing instead?
I used to have visions of me as an old man working in a high office building, kind of in a 1930s deco style, with a flask of whiskey in my desk, you know, that I would dip into at the end of the day before I went home.
That sounds like an après career rather than the job itself.
But no, there's actually nothing else I've ever wanted to do. I've always wanted, you know, and it's strange. I've had two worlds that have often kind of collided, and I feel like with the project that we've done with innova, the Stanley Kubrick's Mountain Home, that I've kind of brought the two worlds together. I'm a composer, you know, and I studied composition in academic settings. You know, I had some wonderful teachers, and I've written a lot of music for chamber music, chamber ensembles, orchestras. Yet there was always a disconnect early on. I felt like, well, I come from a bluegrass and rock and roll background, and yet I have this love also for the vocabulary of contemporary music as well as for classical music. When I was in high school, when I discovered orchestral music really for the first time, I mean, that's when I just became conscious of the fact that it was something, it was an entity that I loved. I would throw my windows open in my room and blast Scheherazade, you know, across the neighborhood, whereas before it had been Jefferson Airplane or the Grateful Dead. And so I gradually sort of transformed my thinking that I wanted to be, you know, I wanted my creative energies to go towards writing music for those large, massive ensembles. But there was always the disconnect. I'm a bluegrass banjo picker, and I also do a lot of free improvisation on the instrument as well. I had the fortune of meeting Famadou Don Moye in France. I was at a concert, it was actually a concert of new music for 6 cellos. And it included a wonderful piece by Xenakis and a number of other composers. And he happened to be there, and he was walking up the aisle, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, that's Famadou Don Moye, the percussionist with the Art Ensemble of Chicago." And I go, "What? You gotta be kidding me." And so my friend introduced me, and we hit it off. We had a lot of things to talk about musically and all, and then we started hanging out and playing time, banjo, drums at first, and then we started adding other musicians on until we had a reasonably large ensemble of French musicians. And I applied for and received a grant through my university, to do a recording with Don Moye, and the younger French musicians were all very excited about actually playing with this legendary figure, and so we got together over it took several days. We did several days of rehearsals, and then we all got together in the studio for 2 solid days of recording at an organization called GRIM in Marseille, Groupe Recherche d'Improvisation Musicale. An organization totally devoted to free improvisation and music. Now, a lot of the project isn't necessarily free improvisation. You know, a lot of the Art Ensemble recordings utilized improvisation, but they always, as Moye will point out, always had kind of a hook, a head that they would always gravitate to, which helped to kind of anchor the composition. And this is kind of what we did with my project as well, although maybe sometimes we were a little bit more strict with it. With some of my tunes, we really kind of followed the traditional jazz type formula. Head, solos, head, home. But we also included enough, since it was Don Moye, we included a number of free improvisations because everybody in the group loves to do free improv. And so what we ended up with was what I think of as a very special project. Kind of for years, I remember, okay, Moye was with the Art Ensemble. Years ago, I saw Lester Bowie, who was the trumpetist with the Art Ensemble, playing at Circle in the Square in New York City with Jack DeJohnette and Eddie Gomez on bass and John Abercrombie on guitar. And I walked out of that concert at the time, and I was with my brother, and I was reasonably young. I was probably 19, 20, and I said, "That's what I want to do with bluegrass." And he kind of paused, and he said, "Won't be bluegrass then, will it?" And I said, "Well, yeah, you're probably right, but this is what I want to do with the banjo then." So it was really kind of amazing to me years later to kind of fulfill that early dream with somebody from the Art Ensemble of Chicago and somebody of the caliber of Don Moye. So that's kind of what that project is about. You know, it's kind of a quasi-jazz, and also there's some tunes on there. We actually do a John Hartford tune. John Hartford was the legendary bluegrass fiddler, banjo player, guitarist, songwriter. So we do one John Hartford tune called Steam Powered Aerial Plane, and we do 1 or 2 of my tunes that are rather Appalachian influenced, and then kind of quasi-jazz stuff as well in the free improv. So it's a whole amalgam of things. You know, I'd say it's all over the map, except that there really is a consistency in the timbre.
And how does this project develop your Stanley Kubrick's Mountain Home previous inner project? Okay,
that actually does connect in, because it was the same kind of desire to bring in my background with the contemporary music thing that I do. And this was a long this was a project that was long developing, and actually I would call it kind of a musical odyssey. I won't even say it. It was a long time ago. I had a dream. Literally, it was a sleeping dream. It was around 4 o'clock in the morning, and I dreamed that I was, at the time I was living in North Carolina, and I dreamed I was in the mountains outside of the little town that I lived in, which was Brevard, North Carolina, and I was hiking over a ridge, and I went into kind of a horseshoe-shaped valley, and it was a very humid morning around 10 o'clock in the dream. And down below I saw this dilapidated old cabin with the roof caved in. And in the dream I thought to myself, oh, that's Stanley Kubrick's mountain home. Little Stanley ran in and out of that door there when he was a child. I don't know if Stanley Kubrick ever really was in North Carolina, but that was the dream. And in fact, I woke up at that point and I thought, I needed to do something to express this dream that I had. And I decided it would be involving Appalachian instruments, chamber ensemble, voice, and I started right away on the project. I mean, I kept it in the back of my mind for a couple of years, but I remember just brainstorming periodically on this. Late one night I was driving home from Florida, and I was driving back into the North Carolina mountains, and I started thinking about John Hartford, who was an old childhood hero of mine. I mean, from the age of 13 or 14 on, I just, absorbed his records. I saw him in concert many times, and I got to thinking, I should find a way to include John Hartford in this project. He was living in Nashville. I didn't know him. I had no idea of how to get to him. But I got very excited about the idea. It was one of these brainstorms that just wouldn't let go. And strangely enough, within the next year, I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Nashville, and he said, oh, I've been hanging out with John Hartford a lot. I just thought, really? And I said, would you please introduce me? So he did, and I had a delightful time talking to John Hartford on several occasions, going to his house, picking bluegrass tunes, fiddle tunes, whatever, and then I got him into the recording studio to record several Appalachian fiddle tunes. I mean, he was a wonderful banjo player, so on one of the tunes he played banjo with my friend Matthew Combs on fiddle. And then there was another tune where he played the fiddle and I played the banjo. And these are included on the album because as the project evolved, I started writing music that was based on folk music, on folk tunes. So we would we took one of the folk tunes, which was called Cluck Old Hen, and I started transforming the melody and using it as material for the chamber ensemble piece. But I thought, well, I need to include the bluegrass band, and this was evolving into Stanley Kubrick's Mountain Home. And I started writing my own text. I'm not a poet by any stretch of the imagination, but the text just kind of flowed out also. I don't know where it came from, and I decided to use that for a soprano line. I love female voices, and so I was writing for a female voice, and what I wanted was a female voice that actually had experience in folk music. Well, what I ended up with was just as good. Alana Davidson ended up actually doing the recording on this, a wonderful soprano, and she understood the project, and she understood what I wanted out of her voice. And she did a beautiful job of actually realizing this. And the way the piece evolved was, at first the two ensembles didn't really mix. The bluegrass ensemble playing fiddle tunes, the chamber ensemble, and I just started having them play over each other out of time. And I thought, well, this is lame. I should be able to find a way to draw the two together. But really what was happening was I was expressing kind of the disconnect between the two worlds. But as the project continued on, then the chamber ensemble started actually working more and more with the bluegrass band. It was an almost unintentional sort of thing. Sometimes they'd all be playing a fiddle tune together in, say, 5 different keys. So there's a tune called Leather Breeches that John Hartford recorded on Steam Powered Aeroplane, the album, and I think that was recorded in 1970 or 71. And so they came together there, and then there was a lick that John Hartford used to do all the time on the banjo. It was kind of this chromatic lick, and I transcribed that lick, and then a lot of the material in the piece came from the John Hartford chromatic lick. He used to call it the slide whistle lick, where he'd take his hand and he'd run it up and down the banjo, basically in the same position, and end up with this very chromatic, very interesting sort of sound. So that was really kind of the genesis of the piece. I spent years doing piano etudes based on themes that then became Stanley Kubrick's Mountain Home, collecting recordings in Nashville from John Hartford. And then eventually Stephen Drury, I sent the score to him once it was finished. Stephen Drury is this fantastic pianist, conductor, new music champion really in Boston, teaches at the New England Conservatory. I sent him the score and he immediately got on board, and he arranged a recording of this piece. And so over the years we did the recording, we had the fiddle tunes, we had the tunes that I recorded with John Hartford, and then there were two other pieces that I did. One was for banjo and orchestra based on Old Joe Clark, and I recorded that with Hank Roberts, another longtime hero of mine. I remember back in the late 80s buying records of the Bill Frisell quartet with Hank Roberts on cello, and I'd look at a picture of these guys thinking, how does one get a chance to ever play with these guys? I'd die to play with these guys. And then when I met Hank and got to play with him, it was really just like, there was that sound. That's the sound I heard on all those records that I listened to him on. It was thrilling, and so I enlisted him in the project. I taught him the words and the melody of Old Joe Clark, and then he kind of just did his own version of it in the studio. And we tried a variety of versions of this. We did free improvisations. They didn't work very well. They all kind of just fell apart right in the middle. So we'd be in the middle of a free improv based on Old Joe Clark supposedly, and it just wouldn't work. And finally, in frustration, I don't know, it was getting late in the evening. We were in Ithaca, New York. I took off my picks. I just started playing two simple chords on the banjo. Hank started singing the tune, and it became this very moody, very quiet sort of rendition of Old Joe Clark, which starts the album. Then you hear In the Zone. After that you hear Cluck Old Hen, which is one of the source material pieces for Stanley Kubrick's Mountain Home. And then finally there's The Cuckoo's Nest with me on banjo and John Hartford playing the fiddle. It's one of my favorite all-time folk tunes, kind of an American Irish thing. And then the last piece on the CD is called The Golden Road. Originally I stole the title from the Grateful Dead. It was the first song on the first album, The Golden Road to Unlimited Devotion. I eventually dropped to Unlimited Devotion and just call it The Golden Road, and it seemed like an appropriately Chinese name. And it's for pipa, banjo, and piano. And Stephen Drury's on the piano. Min Zhao Fen, amazing pipa player, and then myself. So that's basically the project.
That's pretty amazing stuff. It's not only amazing music, but I'm trying to get at all the voices in your head who are calling from different angles in your life and in your history, and it seems that the music is a reflection of a kind of sociological experiment. You know, you've got your chamber music world where there's a whole history of Scheherazade and turning things upside down and backwards and working things out on paper and conservatory traditions. You've got your bluegrass world where there's a very different kind of thing that doesn't really impinge on the former, and then there's the free improv that might be the glue or the molasses that might open a door to linking these things together in the future. But ultimately it seems that time and experience and life will tell us. The next generation of Elwoods, how will these things all become fused? Will it become a porridge? Will it become a new art form? Will it always have this feeling of kind of friction between two worlds?
Well, hopefully there isn't a sense of friction with the end result on both of the projects we've been discussing. I'd like to think they're just sort of natural extensions of one another, that music is just music is music. And I think there are a number of younger composers nowadays that kind of see that. There's some younger composers that are doing amazing things. They come out of rock and roll and punk, and they find ways of actually continuing the idea of orchestral music, continuing the idea of chamber music, only using a completely different sort of vocabulary. It's not so much Mozart or Elliott Carter that they're looking towards, but they're looking towards something else, but using these tools in very, really brilliant ways.
So it's the music of diversity?
Yeah, basically it is the music of diversity. But that's just because we live in the diversity in the world now is really a lot more apparent because we just have a more equitable sort of what am I trying to say? It's a more equitable media, if you will. you know, if you listen to BBC on the radio, oftentimes late at night, many of the reports are from Africa. Many of the reports are from the Middle East. Whereas I remember when I first started listening to the BBC years ago, it was a little bit more America, Britain centered. And now, really, they have more of a world sort of sense. But I think that's just that just exemplifies a lot of what's happening in the media. You turn on the television and you're transported to almost any number of places in the world. The music is so much more readily available too. I remember having trouble, say, 30 years looking for Guatemalan music. It was there. You could find it in certain specialty record stores, but I still remember even when I found those stores, maybe the bin was empty. Now, if you want to hear Guatemalan music, just go on the internet. It's there. There's so much out there, and I think the big challenge is picking and choosing and doing it with taste, you know, actually trying to put together the things with taste, not trying to include everything. And I try to actually express my own background, my own interests. And yes, at one point I got interested in Chinese music, and that led to an interest in actually writing for pipa. And part of that grew out of a comment that one of my composition teachers made once, which was that the folk musics of the world are actually really tied together. You know, you find pentatonic melodies and ideas the world over. One of my music education teachers once pointed out that that minor third, na 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 na, actually occurs in many cultures throughout the world amongst the children. You know, what is it? What are our archetypal similarities, and what do we share? You know, I have no idea. I mean, I can observe this, but I have no explanation for it. And so in my own music, I'm just trying to express the things I grew up with. I don't want to turn my back on the bluegrass or the folk music that I grew up with.
And so, Paul, we are eagerly anticipating the next generation of Elwood tunes in whatever formats they show up. And thank you for talking with us today.
That was a pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for your support of all American composers.